Okay, let me go over where we're going today. This morning, our time grows short. We're going to be in Acts 17. If we get out of it, we get out of it, and then we'll go to 22. But if we don't, we don't, and that's not the end of the world. We're going to take a short break, 5 or 10 minutes, in about 45 minutes, maybe a little more than that. Okay. And then I need to stop at 11:15 because I told the family I would be there for dinner, and it is 6 hours away. So that's kind of I will be able to stop and get gas if I need to.
Did you tell them what time dinner was?
I know everybody knows what time dinner is. Dinner is at 5:30. Our people are little, so some of our people are little. So dinner's at 5:30. Last night I ate at 7:15 and it just felt really strange, but me by myself, I don't need to eat dinner at 5:30. Okay. All right. So we'll go until then. The stuff we're skipping over, let me just say a little bit to get us started today, and then we'll get into the text of chapter 17. What we are skipping contains a variety of episodes that do have direct application to evangelism and apologetics, but they find some kind of duplication, especially in the difficulties, in what we are going to pay attention to. For example, one of the big problems that they have in preaching the gospel is that the gospel is misunderstood to mean something they don't mean. Now, for us, that's going to be different because we are operating in a situation where the word love, which is not extremely common in the way that Christians might use it to describe God's love, the word love has very little frequency in the ancient world. So that's not a problem. You kind of get to define what that means. But they don't get to define what is understood by the wondrous things that are occurring around their ministry. So in chapter 14, they have to keep pagans who don't understand the words they're saying from sacrificing to them. Interesting to note in chapter 14 that Paul and Barnabas are able to do wonders there, and that's why the Lycaonians are impressed by them, but they are not able to speak in the Lycaonian language. That is, that the Holy Spirit reserves the right to give some gifts and not others, even to apostles at different times. But that idea that the framework they're using for understanding the world, or even the subset of the world we would call religion or religious things or spiritual things, they will use to understand the gospel as well. So this is why when you are either preaching the gospel or defending the gospel, you have to know not just your own framework, not just the Bible, you have to know the other person's. Because if you don't even understand what they are misunderstanding or why they are misunderstanding it. Paul is going to be similarly incensed in the way that he is in chapter 14 by the possibility of sacrifice, by what he sees in Athens. And that is there's going to be a rare report of emotion when we get there in a little bit. And I want you to pay attention to that then, because the world to whom and the people to whom Paul is ministering is not a world or a people that Paul would sit there and say, boy, I really hope I get to go somewhere like that someday. Because the people themselves, at least their religious practices, are to Paul naturally disgusting. Something to consider. One other thing that we're skipping is the part of the resolution of the lack of connective tissue between Jerusalem and the other churches. And that's what happens in chapter 15. I've been using the word meeting. I have not been using a word that's sometimes used for that chapter, which is council, as in it's a church council, or it's the first ecumenical council of the church. The reason I haven't done that is because I think it's anachronistic. The councils happen later. They have a certain majesty and authority to them. They're called especially by an emperor, or they're at least convened by an emperor. None of that is on the table. This is a meeting after a series of failed meetings, and there's a breakthrough in this one because James can state clearly to his own congregation that the Gentile mission is legitimate. So the friction between Jerusalem and the other churches, but especially Antioch, which in chapter 14 has also dispatched missionaries to lots of other places, including Saul and Barnabas. That friction is now very low to non-existent, which is good because it had been extremely high. Jerusalem after this will matter as a destination as people circle back to churches to report, but particularly in the case of Jerusalem, to keep carrying collections for the relief of the churches, not only in Jerusalem, but also throughout the province of Judea, which is undergoing this famine. Okay. So if we get there later today, we will see Jerusalem again, but we'll see Paul in Jerusalem talking to his fellow Jews. Okay. So that's a taste of where we've been. I want to pick up in chapter 17 with Paul now ministering in Europe directly. And you will remember that he was implored by a man. And how did he know he was Macedonian? Is that each of these different provinces and sometimes even cities has its own costume, I guess I would say. And so people are kind of instantly recognizable. And that's not really something we have today. We have that maybe from country to country. We have that by maybe walk of life, but we don't have, like in this county, they wear hats that look like this, and the next county over, if we're talking in terms of scale here, Europe is a lot smaller than America. In the next county over, they have totally different hats, or they only ever wear green feathers in their hats, and that's how you know where they come from. So he can immediately see that the man is from Macedonia. They're now there, and let's pick up with this. I'm going to read 1 to 9. Now, when they had passed through Amphipolis and Apollonia, they came to Thessalonica, where there was a synagogue of the Jews. And Paul went in, as was his custom, and on 3 Sabbath days he reasoned with them from the Scriptures, explaining and proving that it was necessary for the Christ to suffer and to rise from the dead, and saying, "This Jesus whom I proclaim to you is the Christ." And some of them were persuaded and joined Paul and Silas, as did a great many of the devout Greeks and not a few of the leading women. But the Jews were jealous, and taking some wicked men of the rabble, they formed a mob, set the city in an uproar, and attacked the house of Jason, seeking to bring them out to the crowd. And when they could not find them, they dragged Jason and some of the brothers before the city authorities, shouting, "These men who have turned the world upside down have come here also, and Jason has received them. And they are all acting against the decrees of Caesar, saying that there is another king, Jesus." And the people in the city authorities were disturbed when they heard these things. And when they had taken money as security from Jason and the rest, they let them go. That's bribe, or that's bail, or we'll talk about that in a second. I think what's really interesting are the little details, some of which are easier to understand than others. But you can see that the method is the same. Wherever they go to synagogues. And in this case, Paul is there on 3 consecutive Sabbaths. So he's there for a little while. What he's doing during the week is not entirely clear. Maybe he's talking to people, maybe he's working, who knows? But on the Sabbaths, he is reasoning concerning the Scriptures. This also tells you that these synagogues are very open. A synagogue is not really, it's not even really like a synagogue today. It's almost more like a community meeting, but the discussion centers on the Scriptures. So this is hard to fathom. One time during graduate school, I had to go to other religious houses of worship and see what they were like. And I went to a synagogue service. And to be honest with you, partly because of just the history of conservative or Reform Jews and their origin in Germany, to some degree, it resembled a Lutheran service. I mean, they even have confirmation. That's how much they're influenced by German Lutheranism. But They asked me, I mean, my name is Adam, so I guess that's a little ambiguous. I think I look pretty Gentile, but your mileage may vary. Maybe Pastor Stout would have been asked as well, but his name is Christopher. So my name is a Hebrew name. So they asked me if I wanted to read the Torah, and I said, no, that's okay. Because all adult men do so, right? What's interesting about this is that was that open. So that was just my only time there. Do you want to come out of your seat and read the Torah? No, thanks. It would have been even more open if they had said, do you want to read the Torah and then talk about it? And I don't know, maybe I would have accepted that invitation because that's what they get to do. They're not just reading, they're not just participating in a liturgical act, they are able to discuss. And that's the opportunity that Paul is seizing week by week. Now, if you are really, really interested in this, there is a giant book called The Ancient Synagogue by a man named Levine. That tells you everything you could possibly want to know and everything that nobody knows about ancient synagogues. How highly structured it was is hard to say because obviously they're leaving room for discussion. That's how this becomes part of their missionary plan. Yeah, go ahead.
Is this the same synagogue that Jesus would have been in, going in?
Yeah.
So it's the same kind of setup.
Yeah.
Uniform throughout the Roman Empire.
The architecture. Yeah. The structure of it, like you read and then you talk, that's common. The prayers, it's very hard to, because it's so hard to reconstruct, of all things, stuff people do. And the liturgy is on some level, whatever group you're talking about, something somebody does. So unless he writes down, here's what we're doing, which in this case, nobody ever did, we don't know. Yeah. So like, what's the order and what are they singing? And
no Xerox copies of
both. They don't have the bulletins saved from back in 1972. Yeah.
Our earliest one is probably what the politics around 220s. He wrote down what they were doing.
So, yeah, in the case of Christianity, yeah, I mean, with Jews, it's hard. It's so hard to know. And most of what modern Jews of any denomination, Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox, Reform, Conservative, Reconstructionist is a little tiny group. They're really mostly just in America. Most of what they're doing is either replicating or reacting to things from the Middle Ages. Like when Christians do Passover Seders so they can understand what Jesus, quote, really did. That's happening. That liturgy is from the European Middle Ages. It would be closer to the time of Jesus to do a Christian divine service because that liturgy is from the time of the Roman Empire. So, you can just stick with that. But it's really hard to know, and almost nothing is written down. So, and the architecture is not clear, and the churches are a little bit different from this architecturally. I mean, I'm talking about ancient churches, because there's always a focus area. Similar to how in a synagogue you have the Torah ark. That's like a big cabinet and the Torah comes out of there. We have a focus on an altar, and that's quite clear in Christian architecture. It's not clear what else is happening besides that there is reading going on in a synagogue. The Torah ark isn't there. There's what's called a bema, and it's usually in the middle. It's still in the middle today in many synagogues. And that's kind of the preaching spot, but there's no Torah ark, like central focus to the room besides that. So it seems to me, the room seems or feels, I'm talking about ancient synagogues, almost like a setup for a lecture or for a discussion, because you will often have seats facing each other and a bema somewhere in the middle of the room.
When you say bema in the middle, it's like you are right now, right?
Yeah, or like here, and you guys are over here.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So it's an open place to discuss. So they always seize that opportunity. Notice what he's doing in 3, explaining. Okay. These are 2 different activities, explaining and proving. So not just that the evidence is laid out, but that the logic is actually pushed home to its conclusion. Okay. Just laying out the evidence is one thing, explaining also that you are like a lawyer providing your case with a closing argument, proving. Okay. This is where and why I think very often lawyers do become interested when they become Christians, or if they are already Christians, in apologetics, because it resembles what they do professionally. It needs to be laid out, and then I'm going to bring home what you need to think at the end of this. Okay. Explaining and proving that it was necessary for the Christ. So there's no dispute about the existence of a Christ, but for the Christ to specifically suffer and to rise from the dead, and saying, this Jesus, remember, this is the insight Saul himself had, this Jesus whom I proclaim to you as the Christ. Okay. So he's engaged in identification. The preaching of the gospel to people interested in the scriptures is a matter of identification and pulling together things they didn't previously understand. Okay. So that's what he's doing here. It's going to get very weird and very different in Athens. And some of them were persuaded and joined Paul and Silas, as did a great many of the devout Greeks. Those are God-fearers. So those are people kind of orbiting the synagogue, but not themselves Jews, and not a few of the leading women. So those are going to be ladies much like Lydia in the previous chapter, who are fairly wealthy. Okay. And that's a function of having noble families or merchant families that are wealthy, and the average rate of survivorship always being higher for women than for men. Okay, that's kind of who those ladies are, and they are benefactresses of many things in the ancient world. You can know who has money in the ancient world because their names go on stuff, just like today. I mean, the Koontz Hall doesn't exist because I haven't given anybody $650,000. So, yeah.
I'm just curious.
Yes.
So it's just a matter of the biblical writing. But wouldn't it be a little bit less confusing if they just simply saying in a lot of women instead of not a few of the leading women?
Yeah. So this,
To say that,
That's
they're
good.
saying it's a lot of women, right? When they say not
that's
few,
it's a Luke way of talking. So
Okay.
Luke is indirect, which is great when you have a difficult situation, because Luke doesn't have to say, and the guy was a terrible person, but in this case, he behaved himself. Luke talks around things or undersells them, which is not a few, instead of saying a bunch. So Luke is never going to oversell you. He will always undersell, not a few. That's just how he talks. Yep. Yeah. Yep. Okay.
but I think that's what gets a whole lot of people, generally speaking, that say read scripture. It's sort of confusing.
Yeah. When people talk about people's reading level or attention span or whatever, I think the big difficulty is that it's an area where, maybe unlike their knowledge of NFL stats, they have never been pushed very hard and are not pushing themselves. And so complexity is difficult. Whereas if I said, what do you know about ACC football, and who's going to win when Virginia plays Virginia Tech? They have an opinion. They might have a detailed set of opinions. They might be able. So people are not stupid, and they never have been, but they do lack effort, particularly in the area of reading. And that makes it very difficult to experience the richness of scripture. Yeah.
Well, the other possibility is, not that they're hiring worldly riches. So that's to say, oh boy, there's a bunch of rich women there. So little I said, not a few.
Yeah. And he also calls them leading.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. He doesn't call them wealthy, but it's a human group. Those are the dynamics. Yeah.
This aside, it's also the continuation of the women gospel follow.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. Okay. So that's who's convinced. But the Jews were jealous. Who are the Jews? The Jews generally in Luke as well as in John, where the term comes up, are not just ethnically Jews, they're also religiously opposed to Christianity. Okay. Because you have to remember a lot of the other people that were persuaded, as also the preacher himself, are ethnically Jews. Okay. So that's just something to keep in mind. And taking some wicked men of the rabble. What's happening here is that you always have social dysfunction. It's a group of human beings. And the rabble are kind of your unemployed or underemployed guys available for chaos, right? If you need to create some chaos. Okay. Just like today. Yeah. So it's like
The Jewish end of
2:00 in the afternoon, and these three guys are just sitting in front of this gas station. What are they doing? What do they do? They're available to become part of the rabble if you need them. So what's going on is you take pre-existent dysfunction, and then you marry that to, I'll give you this, or I'll pay you, or whatever, if you help me create this ruckus. And the ruckus that's where they go because they have lost the case or the debate, right? So the ability to talk and influence the community, they don't have. Paul has been too persuasive in this case. So because they lost that, they now want to create social chaos and political problems, particularly for the Christians. Okay. They formed a mob. So they were a rabble. So a rabble is kind of like a mob before it comes into, I don't know, focus. Right. They form a mob. They set the city in an uproar. There's also an insight here about human nature is that human beings are easily tipped into chaos. Like chaos is easy. You can't set the city in an uproar and say, we're going to do some civilizational advance today. We've never done that. We've never had clean streets or running water. Let's do that today. And we just get that done in 3 hours. Chaos, human beings being interested in destruction, confusion, controversy, that's easy. Right. And you know this anytime that you have been slowed down in traffic, and then 20 minutes later you drive past, it's just a wreck and it's actually being cleaned up and has been cordoned off. But
It's on the other side.
and it's on the other side, but people still, they just like it, right? So the slip into chaotic violence is real fast and real easy, really anywhere. I don't think we should ever be surprised by it. I mean, so they're getting that going, and they attack the house of Jason, seeking to bring them out to the crowd. Why? This is what's called in America a lynch mob. Judge Lynch is going to be the judge if they can get their hands on him. Jason is an interesting name because it's extremely common for Jews who live in Greek-speaking places. It's a name that kind of stands in for the Jewish name Joshua. So Jason is a name you'll find all over the New Testament for this reason, not because everybody was really into. Jason is a hero in the story of the Argo and the fantastic voyage of that ship and the Argonauts, the heroes on it. Sure, but it's a very common name for Jews to have in the Greek-speaking diaspora. When they could not find them, they just dragged Jason and some of the brothers before the city authorities. So this is your Thessalonian equivalent to the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem. They don't have religious jurisdiction. So the case that's made by the opponents is not a religious one like it was in Jerusalem. It's a political one. The gospel is a problem on a religious level for people. It's also always been a problem on a political level for people, because in this case, they are claiming something that you could say they're misunderstanding it. But this actually will be the common claim against Christians throughout the time of the persecutions for the next couple hundred of years, which is their allegiance to Caesar is shaky because they have a different king named Jesus. So they can't be absolutely loyal to Caesar in the way that we ourselves can be. There's something cynical in what they're saying. Why? Because they're Jews. They don't even serve in the military. As an ethnic group, they have exemptions no other nation enjoys, which is part of what the Romans say is it's like, why are you guys so difficult? We're so nice to you, and you're still so difficult with us because they don't have to serve in the military. They have a bunch of set-asides. It is a little cynical to say, well, they don't love Caesar like we do because they themselves don't particularly love Caesar, but they know that that would scare a pagan. So that's the charge. Okay. It's clever, and I think it's effective. These men have turned the world upside down. Who have turned the world upside down have come here also. Now, what is the turning upside down? Jason has received them, and they are all acting against the decrees of Caesar, saying that there is another king, Jesus. That's a brief charge. They may have said more. Just notice a couple of things about the charge. One is that it is vague because the details really don't matter. The fact of the accusation is what matters politically. The details or the truth of those things is really irrelevant. So when the gospel is being attacked, it really does not matter whether it's true or false. And I think a lot of times Christians who are used to trying to treat people with kindness or consideration take too seriously what is said against them. It's because the accusation is not meant seriously in the sense of the person is actually claiming something he himself deeply believes. So just because you are a sincere person does not mean that your opponent is a sincere person. The opponents are making this charge, whether they believe it or not, because the charge is like extremely lethal. You are opposing Caesar. You are guilty of treason. Okay. So it doesn't particularly matter if that's true. Or if you said, well, which decrees have I opposed? It doesn't, who cares? Because the fact that you have been charged with opposing Caesar is all that is needed. Okay. And that they have created a disturbance elsewhere, whatever exactly that means. And it's interesting that this is before the giant ruckus in a very large, very wealthy city of Ephesus. That hasn't even happened yet. So whatever has occurred has come from town to town. What we would call today the news matters quite a bit because it affects everyone's perception of what's being said. So they use the fact that there has been disturbance elsewhere, like they were imprisoned in Philippi. That has happened already. Disturbance elsewhere results in grounds for accusation here in Thessalonica. Okay. So all of those factors, how they're covered in the news, which doesn't exist in the form of media, but just word of mouth in this case, how they're covered in the news, the fact that they take a claim they make that Jesus is king, and they have twisted that into they're trying to destroy the empire in some sense. All of that is fuel for the fire here. Anything on these kind of political dimensions before we go on?
Sure sounds like today.
Sure sounds like today. Yeah. I mean, I all of this has to do, I think the only reason we're surprised at all by this in the United States is simply because a lot of us, like I said, I think we have kind of a sincerity problem. We assume that our sincerity is actually mirrored in other people who are opposed to the gospel. That's not a biblical assumption to make. But I think also we're just unaccustomed to bad press. If anything, the church was handled with kid gloves for a very long time by the media and even by people who didn't go to church. And now it's not. And so rough treatment is we're not used to being pushed around. Yeah. Okay. Yep.
Also,
assuming that there's a search for truth, which isn't always there.
Right. Yeah. There's a search for pleasure.
Yeah.
There's a search for power. There's not necessarily a search for truth.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
And you got to also question who's true, right?
Yeah. Who's truth?
That's
Yeah.
the case here.
Yeah. Pastor Berger.
I wonder if the I just remember parishioners being upset that I preached politics from the pulpit, and I was preaching like life, not like vote for this candidate or vote for this candidate. I didn't mention candidates.
Yeah.
But I think this is. I mean, this is if Jesus. I mean, their accusations true. Right?
Yeah.
So the accusation's actually true because Jesus is the king, but of course the Romans don't understand this.
Yeah.
But I mean, you said yesterday about JFK. You know, there was this great fear in the United States that JFK was going to listen to the Pope, which is laughable considering who he actually was.
Yeah.
But that was actually a real fear that now the U.S. government is going to be suborned by the papacy.
Yeah. And the gospel always has, I mean, religions have a political dimension that you can't escape.
Yeah.
Right. And I mean, if we had a Mormon presidential candidate,
Which we have, huh?
the LDS functions like people imagine the Roman Catholic Church functions. Like things actually are the way they are in Utah because of political control and allegiance. And we talk to the bishop. And I mean, I can provide you with stories from these pastors that I met in Utah to back this up. It's kind of fascinating. I mean, it really is a theocracy. So if I had a Mormon presidential candidate, that would be part of my consideration. Is I'm not sure that the president of the LDS would be calling him every day and saying, do this today. But I mean, so it would depend on the issue, but it's something to keep in mind. I think our people, when they say don't preach politics and you're talking about the murder of children, what they're really saying is, I don't want religion to touch everyday life. As long as it stays over here, then it's fine. Right. And the problem is it can't. It doesn't. It just can't. Yeah. Go ahead.
So to touch on what you said, when our pastor first accepted the divine call at our congregation, not his first summer, but follow-up summer, he did a summer series, Elephants in the Church. And Elephants in the Church is exactly what you're talking about, is what we consider the politics, such as sexual immorality, abortion subject matter, that is clearly addressed by Scripture.
Yeah.
But as a result, we had 5, 3, 4 people that got upset with him and they quit.
Yes.
It was apparently not quite to their terms.
Yes. Right. That's right.
But the soft support of the culture and government for the church and its erosion, which might be a good thing, is demonstrating the fact that, I'm of an age that I never thought I would say abortion is wrong or pro-life is a political state, or marriage, man alone is not a political state.
Yeah.
But that's the big change.
Yeah.
For what it is, but I've noticed.
Yeah. Right. And the church doesn't have control over what is political in the sense of being controversial, potentially changeable, subject to legislation, debate, executive orders, whatever. The church doesn't have control over that, right? We have an agenda that is not the same thing as the current agenda of this senior senator from Iowa, whatever, right? But our message intersects with those things at different times in different ways. And we can't just not have the message.
Right.
Parts of the message just get turned off because they're currently controversial or difficult. It's not actually difficult to understand there are two sexes and only the opposite sexes should marry. That's not actually hard, difficult, really controversial ever in church history. Right. it is now for some people in the United States. I can't just not say that because it is difficult. That doesn't, yeah, right? So,
Well, we have a Lutheran office in DC, which will bring
I think we have one, right?
Yeah.
I don't know what,
Not me first.
yeah, I mean, I don't know what happens there. Maybe somebody does, but, I mean, it's not even, a Lutheran lobbying office or something like that is a little bit more like something Paul's going to do in a little while in Acts, which is use his privileges of citizenship for legal appeal, right? So you can lobby, you could do lots of things, and I don't know whether we're doing them or not. Sincerely, don't know. But this is more like, I say Jesus is king, and somebody in the congregation is fresh off his, no king's protest. And it's like, okay, well, I actually don't care whether you love or hate Donald J. Trump, but you need at least one king. You need at least one. So some of the rhetoric that you're indulging yourself in is going against that. Okay. In the sense that you're saying, no kings is very much related to a much older anarchist slogan, no gods, no masters.
Yeah.
So it's just, I mean, yeah, it's just stuff to know. But I mean, we don't have control. I have no control over somebody thinks that Christ is king is a problem to say. I have no control over that. He always was, always is, always will be. If somebody finds that controversial or difficult now, we need to deal with that. So, yeah.
And what we're reading here is interesting. Is Richard John Newhouse's "Naked Public Square" is a interesting thing. Is that we seem in our day to have ghettoized ourselves because St. Paul is not doing this. So we're okay, we can say all these things in church where we're saying privately, but he's not saying these things privately. He's saying he's broadcasting this to the culture.
Yeah,
he doesn't care. I don't know if that's the right word about the opposition. Like you were just saying, you have to have a king. So
yeah.
I mean, the no kings thing is interesting because in Christianity you have to have a king, or
there is
there's an order to the government which God put in place.
Sure.
And so we if we're true to the scripture, we're going to support that. That the scripture says to.
I think also just relative to no kings, which is is being taken from, and they take the rhetoric and it's from. They're saying this is the American political tradition, and the current president is contravening that, and he's a tyrant. That's not a debate I personally need to have in the church, right? So there's a distinction between religion and politics. I think a big problem a lot of our people have, honestly, is their politics matter a lot more to them than their religion. It's just more important. They spend a lot more time and brain power and energy thinking about politics, even though their level of engagement on a personal human level is much lower. That is, they consume politics and political news. They might actually do stuff in the church, but their knowledge about church things or theology or divine matters is much, much lower. And that's why their emotional investment in specifically political questions is so much higher. Yeah. Go ahead.
It's almost an heresy. Our hope in Christ is for this world to fall.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's a heresy. That's it's probably Christ an idol.
Yeah. Well, we'll see what happens. The world's not going to get more sane, I think, in my lifetime. So we'll see what goes on. Anything else on this section of 17? I'm going to say just a little bit about Berea, okay? And then we'll take about a 10-minute break. The brothers immediately sent Paul and Silas away by night to Berea, and when they arrived, they went into the Jewish synagogue. Now, these Jews were more noble than those in Thessalonica. It's an interesting word, right? Noble, kalos, could also mean good. They were better. They were better guys. Because they received the word with all eagerness, examining the scriptures daily to see if these things were so. So notice that the debate is happening once a week on the Sabbath in Thessalonica. In Berea, they're checking all the time. They're engaged in the way that I just indicated. I think a lot of people are not. Many of them therefore believed, because when you check the Bible, you'll find out that the gospel is true. With not a few Greek women of high standing as well as men. There you go, not a few. But when the Jews from Thessalonica learned that the word of God was proclaimed by Paul at Berea also, they came there too, in the basic sense of the term, going out of their way. They came there too, agitating and stirring up the crowds. Then the brothers immediately sent Paul off on his way to the sea, but Silas and Timothy remained there. Those who conducted Paul brought him as far as Athens. And after receiving a command for Silas and Timothy to come to him as soon as possible, they departed. This speech that is going to happen after the break, we'll read it, is in this again, there's a difference between divine planning and providence versus human perception. To human perception, this looks like an accident. Let's say I get 2 flat tires sometime later today, and I don't get home for dinner, and I'm stuck there overnight. Well, Paul gets extremely sick and preaches to the churches in Galatia. Paul is kind of in physical danger in Berea because of the Thessalonian agitators. And so he's shunted to Athens because they figured they won't care there. And part of their not caring there is it's not only a bigger place, Athens is a place that is simply more open-minded. And we're going to hear that. And Paul's going to use that to his own advantage. But people there are going to, if you say he's got a weird religious idea, people will say, that's fine. Whatever. You know, I was at Barnes & Noble last night. The Barnes & Noble in Lynchburg is fascinating because it has certain standard Barnes & Noble things like pride displays, but they're kind of like off to the side in like side aisles. And there's 2 entire aisles of Bibles, in addition to the aisles devoted to other Christian books. And there's like 1 shelf that contains Buddhism, Islam, and like every other religion, right? So they've stocked it for the local clientele, right? And it's very interesting but I would imagine if in that Barnes & Noble, I said, I have a weird idea about the book of Revelation, people might actually be interested, right? Whereas they would be indifferent where I live. Or they'd be like, is that in the Bible? They don't know. Right? They're not reading the Bible. Okay. So Athens is this is supposed to be sort of a safe spot to put him, and then they will pick him up. And it's interesting that Luke follows Paul because the main body, as well as the 2 most recently planted churches in Thessalonica and Berea, are elsewhere. So we're following a guy on what is apparently a detour and just sort of like you hang out there until somebody comes and gets you. So it looks both accidental and should be fairly unimportant. Okay. Anything about Berea you want to discuss? Yeah, go ahead.
What's the local used there?
What's that?
Organics. Not co-op.
Not Colossus. Okay.
So high-born, well-born.
Yeah.
Did they expect the Bereans to be open-minded? And then the rabble comes from Thessalonica. Right. And then Athens is right, more safe.
Yeah. Well-born. I mean, that's where we get eugenics from. Eugenes or Eugene.
Yeah.
We also well-born. I think that the description of what that is their activity in the scriptures, and everything would have been fine in Berea if the other people hadn't gone out of their way. So it's just a more peaceful group of people for whatever set of reasons, but mostly because they're actually reading the Bible. Yeah. Okay, right.
2 things I'm saying.
Yep.
One, the group that's following him is the rabble and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Are these related to the Judaizers that chase Paul around?
I don't think so, because the Judaizers claim to be Christians.
Right.
They even claim to be apostles. That's why Paul calls them super apostles.
Yeah.
These are just Jews antagonistic to Christianity. Yeah.
That's kind of how I read it. Sure. Second part was, I'm just interested in the fact that they're sneaking Paul around and brutal. I mean, I wonder how Paul took that.
Yeah.
Because he's so bold most of the time.
Yeah.
The others,
But
not just here, there's other places too.
I think he understands he's kind of a liability sometimes. And they're doing it out of, they don't want him to die.
But he isn't here.
I don't think he personally cares, but they care. And you hear that. And I honestly, I think that's part of the humility. Like Paul already had his, and I've never been diagnosed with cancer, but I have had experiences in my life where I tell my wife, like, I've already had my cancer diagnosis here. And that does change your perspective as far as how my life was going. So that changes your perspective on things. I imagine if you encounter the risen Jesus in the flesh and he tells you you're wrong, all bets are off.
Yeah.
But for the sake of the church, they do try to preserve his life. And that's what he says to the Philippians. It's like, look, I'm fine with dying. I understand it's better for you if I'm still here. I think that very healthy perspective, but they do try to overhearing that.
Couple things. And
Yeah.
again, Jesus, he slipped away because it wasn't his time.
Yeah.
He had he knew where he had to go, and Paul had to do some other stuff.
Right. Yeah.
The other word I was kind of gone down to was where the word rabble.
Yeah.
But Exodus.
Yeah.
And there was a certain rabble, and they were fetching about the food.
Yeah.
Now I don't know the relationship between the Greek and the Hebrew for this.
Yeah.
But my thought was that rabble back then were just complaining about the food.
Yeah.
Now this rabble is worse.
Well, yeah, right. That's also the difference. And we don't think about this a lot. I haven't really talked about it. We only have 2.5 days for Acts. Is that the New Testament, after the midpoint of Jesus's ministry, becomes basically what the Bible has never been before, which is a book that's mainly urban. And Christianity is going to be mainly urban. And a group of people in a rural area is just fundamentally different and dissolves much more easily and isn't as big as when you bring a bunch of people together in a city, and especially an ancient city. I mean, they're not on their phones. People are just standing around, basically waiting for trouble to start if possible. So lots of things occur in Acts that you've actually never seen before in the Bible, because who's rioting in Jericho? Like nobody's rioting in these little villages. With even the picture that Jesus painted in what we read upstairs this morning, that's a small farm picture, because one guy plows and then comes in and serves you the meal. That's a small farm, and there are thousands of these as archaeological sites all over Israel. So that's life. It's rural, small farms, small towns. Very different when you have a city and people standing around there. So that's part of the difference, I think, is that Old Testament through about, I don't know, in any given gospel, Matthew 12 is rural almost entirely, in the sense of being farming, wilderness, small towns. Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
I was going back to the not caring, if we had to be careful with that. I mean, to live as Christ, to die is gain.
Yeah.
It's Paul, and to live is Christ, and so to live is Christ, and so I live because this is important, that I preach the gospel.
Mm-hmm.
And so taking a step back or whatever. I don't know. You have much more knowledge of this than I do about the acts in here, about what St. Paul is doing. He's being being willing to die is different from wanting to die.
Yeah, sure.
And being just like the soldier who's ready to
fatalistic,
who died because he's going to die anyway, so he might as well die in this battle. And so he doesn't fight well.
Yeah,
Paul's fighting well.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. Yeah, I don't think Paul is fatalistic in the same sense that, like, when at the end of the battle on Mount Gilboa, Saul figures he's going to die in some way, so he's trying to pick the way he's going to die. Paul's not doing that.
He's not careless.
No.
But he cares about the gospel, not about his own life.
Yeah, right. Okay, Chris.
When you kind of talked about Luke follows Paul
Yeah,
as Luke or as the storyteller here. I mean, it's
as a storyteller.
like where is Luke? I mean, he kind of disappears. But like I guess most of the
Luke is in it.
Luke doesn't really care about Luke. I mean,
No,
he's this story. He doesn't.
Luke does not have main character syndrome. Not at all.
No.
Yeah.
So there's like a we.
Yeah.
There's gonna
He would have been such a great guy. So he's just great. Like, and he would have talked about all your problems to other people, and he actually would say it in the kindest possible way. There's not a lot of those human beings on this earth, so yeah, just great guy. Yeah. Do you guys want to take a break, or you want to just keep going? We have 45 minutes. You want to do 5 minutes? Is that okay? So you can get. You're okay. You want to just keep going? Okay, that works for me. I don't want to short you anything. All right. Are we ready to talk about Athens, or we have anything else on Berea or Thessalonica? Okay. All right. Let's do Athens. We're going to start with Paul's initial reaction in his first speech, and then we'll talk about the speech on the Areopagus. The Areopagus is also called Mars Hill. That's a name you see around. Things are named after it. Areopagus is just the Greek for Mars Hill. I'm going to read verses 16 to 21 to get us started on this one. Now, while Paul was waiting for them at Athens, his spirit was provoked within him as he saw that the city was full of idols. So he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and the devout persons, and in the marketplace every day with those who happened to be there. We'll talk about how that worked. Some of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers also conversed with him, and some said, "What does this babbler wish to say?" Others said, "He seems to be a preacher of foreign divinities," because he was preaching Jesus and the resurrection. And they took him and brought him to the Areopagus, saying, "May we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting, for you bring some strange things to our ears. We wish to know, therefore, what these things mean." Now all the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there would spend their time in nothing except telling or hearing something new. Okay, I mean, yeah, I have Athenian proclivities, so I feel sympathetic to them. I'm not a Jerusalemite. Okay, I think you guys can kind of tell that. Watch this sequence, because it's kind of fascinating, right? So Paul is sent to Gentiles and to kings and to the children of Israel. Paul's common method when he gets somewhere new is, let me find the familiar people, who are, of course, the children of Israel. So even in Athens, the reason there's a synagogue is because what's called the Jewish diaspora, which just means the spreading out and the scattering, has grown enormously in the past 200 years, by the time of the New Testament, past 200 years. So, last 150, first 50, last 150 of BC, first 50 of the years of our Lord. And that has been because the opportunities are vastly greater outside of what they would call Israel, what the Romans are calling Palestine, just for life. So this happens anytime that you have an area somebody can travel in, and the area where he is just not offering a lot, especially to his children potentially. So he's going to go somewhere else if he can travel, and that's what the Jews are doing at this time. So the largest section of the Jewish diaspora is actually east of Israel in the Babylonian, or then later the Persian empires. Like, most people don't come home from the exile. Okay. The ones who do are like the forefathers of, Jesus, who come home from the exile and settle in the Galilee and give the town where they settle a messianic, hopeful name, Nazareth, having to do with Nasir, the righteous branch of David that will grow and be raised up. A lot of people, even after having come home, don't find a lot to do there, and so they keep going. So the diaspora is pretty huge. Almost anywhere Paul goes, he's going to be able to find other Jews, and he goes there first. We don't particularly have equivalents to this because we have very few public places where people spend time with each other. But that's what the synagogue is. So Paul can always rely on the fact that when he gets there, he can talk to somebody, and he will be able to talk also about the scriptures. When we think about spreading the gospel, these kinds of places barely exist. I guess they sort of exist on the internet. People might be listening to something there or watching, even more commonly, something there. But that's what he relies on. Anywhere I go, I will have people I can talk to. So that is where he starts. So his actual method of operation always puts him in contact with other Jews, even though his main target is going to be Gentiles. The other thing that his life enables is contact with all sorts of people wherever he goes, because Paul has a career. That's the wrong word for it. A skill maybe would be a better word, that enables him to work anywhere and be in contact with people wherever he's working. So that's different from, say, remote work, because if you work remotely, you don't necessarily have contact with local people. This would be more like Paul always moves there and starts working at the grocery store, something like that. But that's his method. And it's tremendous because it enables him to do something that is not the way that I hear people talking about worker priests today, which is you get a job. If you're a pastor, you get another outside job in order to keep yourself where you are now. And I understand why people do that, but that's not why Paul does it at all. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 8, if you're preaching the gospel, you should get your living from the gospel. It's what should happen. He says, I don't do that, but the reason he doesn't do that is so that he can preach the gospel in places where there's nobody to support him. So he uses worker priest as a means of that's an offense, to put it in football terms, that's an offensive scheme. It's not a defensive scheme. We use it defensively to keep something in place. He uses it offensively to move the ball downfield. Okay. So that's how he's in the marketplace every day with those who happen to be there. So you're just taking a random sample of the available population. Okay. Because he's talking to people. The other skill that is imaginable that he has is not just that he works with his hands, but that he also can basically talk to anyone. So he's not going somewhere and then, I don't know. I mean, people are different, but some people take a long time to open up or warm up or in some cases even be pleasant. I mean, it depends on a lot of things, but he's able to talk to a variety of people who are just there. The marketplace is a place that people are coming on a daily basis. They're shopping on a daily basis for perishable things. So they're in and out. He's encountering a wide variety of people. Among the people he encounters are philosophers. Have I told you guys? I can't remember if I told you guys. Philosophers, we think of it as an academic position. Did I do that? Okay. I think, did I? I thought so. That a philosopher is not somebody that necessarily has a certain job teaching or something. A philosopher is somebody who, as people are talking, has a particular, we could even say, take on things that he wants other people to think. And he might receive money from people who appreciate that or want him to talk more about that. Paul is going to be something like a philosopher in Ephesus because they're going to rent out a place for him to talk every day in the hall of Tyrannus. So a philosopher might receive money. He doesn't have to, because philosophy is just a way of life, an approach to things, and you think other people should share it. So it would be like being a content creator or an influencer on the internet today, or it would be somebody who is that person? It's just somebody who's saying you should stop cleaning with anything except natural substances, right? You should only use like vinegar for everything. And like thousands and thousands of people are now following, that person who's saying that. It's somebody who's saying you need to get up at 5 a.m. and you need to exercise and you need to only eat meat. And here's why. And here are 22, minute and a half TikTok videos I've made about this. People believe that it changes their life. That person is particularly getting money from ad revenue. So honestly, social media is a little bit more like the ancient world than how we think of philosophy as you're trained and you have all these books and maybe you write books and you talk about books and no one knows who you are really unless they're already paying to go to college. Okay, so a philosopher is a little bit more like an influencer. Then maybe that leaves a bad taste in your mouth. But it's a little bit more like the truth than the way that we use the word. The two different groups have two different approaches to the question of what pleasure is for. Because everyone admits that one day you're going to die, so then pleasure stops. And before that, you will age and you will have hardships and you will suffer, and pleasure might diminish or pleasure might vanish for a while. So what do? Epicureans say maximize pleasure. Because of those limitations, maximize pleasure. Get as much as you possibly can. Stoics say minimize your addiction to pleasure because it's basically an illusion anyway. Okay. So that's really basic. There are, of course, other nuances, but I hope that's helpful to understand it. So he's talking to some of these people. Remember, Paul isn't really trained. Go ahead. Yeah.
How would a Christian answer that?
How would a Christian answer that?
Yeah, that's pleasure.
Yeah, it's the wrong focus to begin with. Because the existence of pleasure doesn't mean goodness or evil. So it's kind of like saying, I go to football games to see the beautiful grass that they raise. That's like, what? I mean, it's there and it is beautiful, but who does that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Chasing after that which God calls us towards, and there is pleasure and there's
Pain. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, Christians historically are more favorable to Stoics because Stoics seem to understand that maybe you should seek something else. Stoicism is a little bit like Buddhism. It's just saying like things are going to suck. So you need to basically focus on getting over the fact that they suck. But beyond that, it doesn't have a lot to offer. But I don't think Christianity needs to be invested in minimizing or maximizing pleasure. Pleasure is incidental in the way that lots of other things occur. That doesn't mean that your whole focus is those things. So I would look at pleasure as a byproduct of certain things. And the thing could be good or the thing could be evil, but the pleasure is a byproduct. Generally, if I focus on pleasure, I'm going to pursue evil more often than not. Because if that's my focus, I mean, it's easier to obtain pleasure through sin than not. Yeah.
Do we live in a mostly Epicurean world?
We live in a totally Epicurean world. The exceptions are usually in the pursuit of some other pleasure. So I might be stoic about training for my NFL career in order to maximize the pleasure of having, $123 million over the next 3 years to be the defensive end for the Steelers. Specific case of TJ Watt. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, and I think that Christianity has in people's minds a stoic reputation. That Christianity is about minimizing pleasure in life. And I don't, that's also not my focus. I understand the reputation to some degree, because a lot of what people know about Christianity are specific political positions they figure Christians have, and that Christianity dislikes sex, and that but that's largely drawn from the history of monasticism. And your number one denomination in terms of numbers in the United States is Roman Catholicism, and your number two group of people by denomination are people who used to be Roman Catholic. Yeah, that's still a bigger group, former Roman Catholics, wherever they've gone, than the next denomination, which is the Southern Baptist Convention. So I understand that, right? And that probably if our country were majority Protestant, the reputation would be more skewed toward the political position thing. Yeah. Because that's actually more characteristic of conservative Protestant churches, and less so towards the Christianity just doesn't like X or Y or Z. They're kind of getting that from monasticism. Yeah.
So that our defense, that in response to
Mhm.
that or even attack, because people just assume that.
Yeah.
Is to
You're chasing the wrong thing.
right
You're chasing the wrong thing.
as your will come.
Yeah, I would also say, I mean, not having grown up in church, I would also say it's a lot easier to come by impressions of Christianity, or even Christians who will tell you about things that they are against. But it is harder to know what is the gospel. I mean, I would definitely say I didn't have a cognitive awareness of what is the Christian gospel. I knew Christians were against abortion. So I'm just like a guy that drives by the Jesus loves you sign. So yeah. Go ahead, Mark.
Isn't part of the problem the pursuit of pleasure?
Yeah.
Sheer pursuing of it.
Yeah.
And I brings to mind Screwtape Letters by Lewis, where he Screwtape says, "Don't let our patient have a real pleasure, as it's a gift from God, the enemy above, because we have not been able to reproduce one pleasure. The pleasure of
Yeah.
being with your wife,
Yeah.
pleasure of being with your children, pleasure of good eating.
Yeah.
But it's all great stuff.
Yeah.
It's always wanting to have more of it.
Yeah. I guess I would, if I were trying to persuade the person that pleasure is not, I would talk about discontentment,
Right.
because he will find it if that's what he's seeking to maximize pleasure. He will find his good. He'll get the boat, but then it won't be big enough. And somebody will have a bigger boat. Yeah. Or he'll get the boat, and like there's a guy in my neighborhood, beautiful bass boat, never goes anywhere.
Yeah.
Right. Like I feel for him almost. Like I don't begrudge him the bass boat. I feel bad for him that he never takes it anywhere. Yeah.
You should invite him to take you fishing.
Yeah, sure. That's fine. I would go fishing to be alone, so that's fine. Yeah. Go ahead.
It's interesting here because we're talking about, it's like we're talking about something that's beside the point, because actually the pleasure, I've been thinking about Father Yeager and all his kids last night, because I had fun playing with the kids, because I don't care about the adults. I just love the kids.
Yeah.
And I don't think he even understands. I think he does understand this cognitively a little bit, but he doesn't understand it because my kids are grown.
Uh-huh.
What a beautiful and wonderful thing that is.
Yeah.
This is the pleasure is actually in the work that God has given you to do, because God's given it to you and it's a gift.
Right.
And so, Stoic or
Epicurean,
who don't, why even talk about that? Just do what God, and part of this is kind of Stoic as well, I guess. Your carnivores are one of the things, right? What are they doing? They're actually, what are they? Are they Stoic? Because they're disciplining themselves that they only eat meat, and they're getting up at 5 a.m. and exercising. I don't know what that is, but if you're actually doing, discipline is a godly virtue.
Yeah.
And humility is a godly virtue.
Yeah.
And when we practice these things, when we're actually living in the faith, then you don't think about whether you're depressed or you're happy. You just are.
I think that you have like a giant philosophical doctrine over top of something, maximize pleasure, minimize attachment to pleasure. Underneath that, you could have all sorts of different attitudes toward like marriage, for example, right? So cynics are not going to promote marriage, but some other philosophers will. And the Romans have a big philosophical difference with the Greeks on the value of family, because Romans see Greeks as promoting chaos by not thinking philosophically enough about why is there a state, why are there families, and so forth. And Christian theology is really more an heir of the Romans, honestly, especially church law, than we are heirs of the Greeks, although we use Greek terminology for everything. Yeah. I just noticed the reactions to him. Number one, what does this babbler wish to say? I think that's a criticism of his Greek. I don't think his Greek is bad. I think it sounds weird. He's growing up in a different place that in antiquity, at least, maybe not at this time, but in antiquity is a completely different dialect, right? Ionic Greek is not the same as Attic Greek. I think his Greek sounds strange. Notice also, so he's a babbler, but notice also that what he is saying is being fundamentally misunderstood, because the proclamation of the gospel involves Jesus and the resurrection, but a pagan hears that as being about two different gods, because they have temples devoted to gods with names such as Athena in the Parthenon. They also have temples devoted to what we would think of as like qualities or something, like victory, that's Nike, or the Romans have a goddess named Concordia, harmony. Okay, so when they hear Jesus and Anastasis, resurrection, they think those are two different gods. So what he is saying is just being fundamentally misunderstood according to their common cultural and specifically religious framework. Okay. But they took him and brought him to the Areopagus, saying, "May we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting, for you bring strange things to our ears. We wish to know, therefore, what these things mean." If you don't find that praiseworthy, I can't really help you, because at least they want to listen. Okay. Now, it used to be said that this was kind of the paradigm for campus ministry. I'm not exactly sure that's true anymore. Not on every campus, certainly, because very often college campuses, rather than being forums, creating a sincerely open-minded person is really there to indoctrinate you. So it doesn't create this kind of curiosity, but where you find this kind of curiosity far away from a college campus or on a college campus, it's very nice, because at least the person wants to hear. Luke has to explain it because he knows this is unusual. So he says, they all like to do this. This is weird of them, but this is what they like to do. They like to hear new things. Most people don't. So he's got to explain it. Before we go into his speech, anything else on that little section you want to discuss? Yeah, that's Rappy.
When Paul was in the synagogue,
Yeah.
like your experience,
Mhm.
I'm guessing that he too would be asked, would you like to say something?
Yes.
In that vein, and taking that and what else you said about people dressing me a little bit differently.
Yes.
Would all of them have stood out in the marketplace, and people would have come to him and just said, "Hey, where are you from?
Yeah.
Who are you?"
Yeah.
When I about this happens, I'm sure to all the other pastors here. Either one of three things people want from me: money, they want to discuss something in the Bible, or they want me to pray for them.
Yeah.
And that's really only because the way I'm dressed.
Yeah.
Now, having said that, it seems to me that Paul is not proactive, much like like Jesus, he's moved that people coming to him.
Yes.
Now there are exceptions, of course.
Yeah.
But I find this is absolutely fascinating. The one thing that irritates me, and here's the only witness who saw it, about the truck is that they irritate me.
Yeah.
They're always coming in and in my face.
Yeah.
But he never does this.
Yeah.
It seems that he always waits for the invitation or someone else to open the door.
Yeah.
And he's very collegiate and congenial about
Yeah.
thoughts.
Yeah. He is proactive in finding a place to discuss. He's not proactive in forcing himself on any given person.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Synagogue, Ariatic.
Synagogue, marketplace, and here the Areopagus is kind of like a debating forum, but he's brought to that. To Pastor Rappy's point, he's brought to that. He has to be invited to that.
Okay.
But publicly accessible places where you can talk to people, yes. Okay. All right. Anything else so far? Let's take a look at his speech then. Remember that he is upset by the amount of idolatry that's publicly visible in the statues everywhere in Athens. From verse 22, I'll read to the end of the chapter. So Paul, standing in the midst of the Areopagus, said, "Men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are very religious. For as I passed along and observed the objects of your worship, I found also an altar with this inscription, 'To the unknown God.' What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place, that they should seek God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him. Yet he is actually not far from each one of us, for in him we live and move and have our being, as even some of your own poets have said, for we are indeed his offspring." Those are his proof texts. Being then God's offspring, we ought not to think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by the art and imagination of man. The times of ignorance God overlooked, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent, because he has fixed the day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed. And of this he has given assurance to all by raising him from the dead. Now, when they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some mocked, but others said, "We will hear you again about this." So Paul went out from their midst. But some men joined him and believed right then and there, not just asking to hear later. Among whom also were Dionysius the Areopagite and a woman named Damaris and others with them. Okay. Just notice this structurally, and then we can talk about some of the elements in it, is that structurally, Paul is moving from common observation. That's the first two verses, 22, 23. In 24, he now makes an assertion which is controversial in I've only got one God, and that God does not live in any of these temples that you've erected. You have them all over the place. Okay, so observation, he now makes a controversial assertion. He makes a different controversial assertion in 25 by saying he doesn't need things. And then he makes a statement about creation, not just about the nature of God, but about his creation in 26 through 27, continuing into 28. And that's about the nature of man. So notice just if you want to put this in terms of content, you would talk about theology proper, the doctrine of God, who is God. You would also talk about anthropology, the doctrine of man. Those are the building blocks for what he's going to say when he brings it home to talk about repentance. Okay. So all of that is controversial, right? It's not, nothing he's saying is necessarily shared by anyone, right? So having to challenge Darwinian evolution is not really a new task here. The church's doctrine of creation was controversial in the ancient world too. Okay. But the sequence is important to note because he doesn't spend a lot of time. This is very common in books on preaching, like figure out how to connect and just come off like a normal guy. I don't really do a lot of that myself personally. The reason being, it doesn't seem like it matters to the apostles. Like they don't spend a lot of time being like, well, I'm a normal person like you, so let's talk for the next 6 minutes about a time that I was changing a flat tire with my dad. And it's like, that's nice, but it just doesn't, they don't spend a lot of time doing that. They kind of go into the thing. Yeah. So that's where he goes, God, creation, man. His proof texts are not from the Bible because he needs them to agree with him on, and could he pull proof texts from the Bible for all that? Yeah. But he's trying to persuade them. So he's kind of looking for the absolute minimal amount of agreement needful. So he quotes from two different writers, and these are kind of, this is not going to be, unless you get a doctorate in classics, you're not going to read fragments from these people because they're not particularly important, but they are sort of popular. The way that I think of them is, if you're in an airport, you can usually get almost any kind of thriller page turner that you want, but you can also always get pop psychology books, sometimes sold under the label of business, like how to lead difficult teams, right? Books like this, right? Or packaged Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. And the print is always big, and CEOs buy these books for different teams to read, stuff like that. That's where these guys are coming from. So he's using common observation about human beings in order for them to sit there and say, oh yeah, that's right. Like, oh, we are his offspring. And it doesn't mean that he thinks everyone is going to listen to him, but he's casting as wide as possible a net to get support for the assertions that he's making. He doesn't have Greek pagan support for his doctrine of creation. He's got it in part for his doctrine of man, but he doesn't quote stuff where it's not actually, where it's a biblical assertion and he couldn't get a pagan to agree with it. He just asserts it. Okay, so the proof is kind of maximal possible agreement from his listeners. The rest of the structure goes like this, is that you need to conclude, if all of what I said is true, is that the way that you are religious is illegitimate. Okay, so maximal possible agreement is not there to be nice. It's there to keep them moving rhetorically with you as long as possible before you make the hard demand that their life is completely wrong, because the way that they serve God or try to serve the gods is wrong. You are very religious, but you're totally off base. Don't worry about the past right now, the times of ignorance, he calls them. Instead, repent. And if you want proof that you're supposed to change, God raised a man from the dead. That's the speech. Okay? So Jesus and the resurrection are proclaimed, but the point of the speech, if I got up and said, what do I want them to take away from this, is I need to change the way that I am religious, because the way that I am religious is totally illegitimate according to the Creator. The other thing I haven't mentioned, because it's not a structural element specifically, is that he uses their religious practices as a jumping off point, because they are doing something in uncertainty and he's asserting with certainty. In uncertainty, as a kind of insurance policy, they have an altar to the unknown God, because you may know, or you may remember, you may have read that it's often the case that you are cursed in any given Greek story by the God whom you forgot to worship or whom you forgot to honor. So you have an insurance policy to the unknown God, and sacrifice is offered there in case you don't know the name of the God of the land where you are, or you have forgotten someone or something similar. So that's kind of an uncertain insurance policy. And he is saying it's just a rhetorical device. He's not saying like that altar is actually dedicated to the true God. He's saying, I proclaim to you with certainty who God is, the only God. Okay. Observations about structure and questions that you have. Something we didn't. Go ahead. Yep.
The altar being unknown about.
Yes.
When they had considered that to be God.
No, not the altar. No. An image, yes,
But not.
is the God. Yeah. But not the altar. Yeah. Yeah, the God is unknown. And it's kind of unusual for Greeks because Greeks are really into pictures. I mean, not every pagan religion is like Shinto in Japan is what's called an-iconic, meaning it's actively against pictures. You don't have many pictures of gods or goddesses in Japan. In Greece, you have pictures of everything, statues of everything. And, that's kind of their practice of Christianity too. Pictures of everything instead. Pictures of everything.
Another question
Yep.
is, I always thought the reason Paul did not bring up Bible is that he didn't know them.
Yeah, so where it's not actually an authoritative source, he doesn't bring it up. Yes.
And I find it interesting he argued about well creed.
Yeah.
That we all know.
Yes. Yeah. And- yes.
It's about creation. It's refresh.
And in Romans 1, right? Is that the nations know, Paul says, they know they're accountable. They suppress the truth in unrighteousness, but they know they are accountable, which to me has always well explained the unique hostility people have to Christianity. They're not just indifferent. I'm totally indifferent to the Oddfellows. Totally, it just never. The reason I'm thinking about them is because there's one of these exits off 501 is, or whatever you call it, it's Oddfellows Road. And I don't even think about them. Christianity is different for people.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not just another religion. So, yeah. Yep. Go ahead.
Can I cut to the chase here as time is close? I'm
Mhm.
interested, particularly in your understanding what happens here, because as one of those people we were talking about yesterday was born Lutheran.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, born Lutheran. Yeah.
Any understanding of this at all? But when he speaks of the resurrection,
Yeah.
I mean, Paul talks about preaching Christ crucified, and that's where I'm Lutheran. It's Christ crucified.
Oh.
I don't have a problem with the resurrection. They just like, whatever, resurrection. Yeah, like, sure. And this is really I have no cognitive understanding of if you something has happened,
Yeah.
then it has happened. So if Jesus is raised from the dead,
Yeah.
I don't care what your philosophy is about resurrection.
Mhm.
But apparently this is a huge stumbling block. Not Christ crucified here, but the resurrection. And he doesn't talk about Christ
Yeah.
crucified.
No, he does not. Yeah. There is definitely a difference between what Lutherans believe Paul to be saying and what Paul obviously actually says. And what Lutherans often seem to believe Paul is saying is that all Paul is ever talking about is the crucifixion of Jesus. And that, I think, is partly because that is the debate that is the origin of our distinctive existence in the Western Church, is a debate about soteriology and specifically merit and how that relates to the work of Christ on the cross. So it makes sense to me that we would see that as almost like, for Lutherans, Good Friday is like the chief day in the church. And Easter is like, it's good that it's there.
Yeah.
And we go to church then too, but like, it's all done on Good Friday. almost. And
It's finished.
yeah, I think biblically that is imbalanced because the resurrection not only gets preached more directly and more often in Acts, it also is preached in ways that we don't usually preach it, like vindication. The resurrection is vindication, or the resurrection is here, basically God's signature saying, I'm definitely going to judge you because I raised a man from the dead so that I'd have a judge. So these are just ways of preaching that we usually are not doing.
And this is what he's preaching here.
Mm-hmm.
God raised a man from the dead who's going to judge you.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the resurrection. But it's it's not the judgment that they're contending with.
Correct.
The resurrection.
That's right, because they don't have a problem. There are a couple of concepts that they don't have a problem with. A God appearing in human form, that's fine. A judgment after you die, fine. The resurrection is the stupid part.
Okay.
Because people don't come back from Hades unless Hades has no claim on them, in which case they're gods.
Is this a problem for people in our day and age? Again, I'm completely clueless about it.
I don't know. I actually think
Was it a problem with you? I mean, how'd you know? Okay.
No, but I was like, I was kind of like a lot of these young guys that you see today, where it was kind of like my options are what I'm told is true about the world in college or Christianity. And Christianity doesn't specifically hate straight white males. So I kind of did 2020 back in 2004 is what I'm saying.
Okay.
Like 2020, the political intensity and all that. I did that. I just did that ahead of time. I did the homework early. So that was a little bit different, but I would say for a lot of people, the concept of a judgment today would be much harder than a resurrection. Like, I'm accountable. I mean, think about stuff that even our own people have problems with: hell, punishment, etc. Ancient people don't. Yeah, you're going to be tortured by a god for your evils. Sure.
People love those books about people who've been to heaven and come back.
Yeah, they do. Yeah,
Because it's a spiritualized heaven. The other problem.
Oh, yeah.
sure. They do have an issue with resurrection of the flesh.
Yeah.
Yes. Which the Greeks would have shared.
Yeah.
But judgment problem for us, probably not a problem for the Greeks. Yeah. Okay. But yeah, his preaching, the resurrection always gets in there. And maybe the crucifixion is in there in the extended cut, but the resurrection is always there. Yeah. Okay. Other questions, other thoughts? Otherwise, I'm going to kind of pull things together here. Okay. Just some suggestions for you to go forward if you are very interested in Acts. We talked about the books by Schnabel. He's also got a commentary, especially for the pastors, on Acts that is very good. I would see if you can get it from a library somewhere, but you can buy it. It's printed it's the Zondervan Exegetical Commentary in the New Testament. And another place to go for understanding Acts well is a multi-volume commentary by a guy named Craig Keener, Keener. And that's kind of the, to coin a phrase, the gold standard right now, so far as Acts goes. I find Acts endlessly fascinating because it describes the life of the work in the vineyard. So I find it, the more that I go back into it, in the same way that I find Jesus's parables descriptive of the life in Christ and the stakes of the life in Christ and things like that, I find Acts an endless resource for my own understanding of what I'm doing. The other book that's like that, I'm talking about my work. The other book that's like that in the New Testament that I continually find in that way is John. Because John contains not only the stuff that's in the other Gospels, but the kind of observations about what it is like to preach the gospel and for people to hear the gospel that you find particularly in Acts. You find in the synoptics, but you find especially in Acts. And John just kind of puts it all into one, kind of like he has a Pentecost in John 20 there. Yeah. Yep, go ahead.
You know, would you repeat the name of that last book?
The last book is Craig Keener, and I think it's just called Acts.
Just Acts.
Acts, yeah. Mhm.
Publisher.
Yeah, I want to say the publisher in that case is Erdman's, but don't quote me on that. Yeah, it's a commentary. And Keener is teaches, I think, at Asbury in Kentucky, and Schnabel, I think, is at Ted's Trinity Evangelical Divinity School in Illinois.
No Roman Catholics on Acts.
Roman Catholics on Acts, not Roman Catholics have never been terribly interested in me as exegetes, except in the case of the Gospels, because with the Gospels they have, like, the French have a research institute, the biblical school in Jerusalem, and they're good on that. But I don't find it to be particularly insightful. No. Okay. That's just kind of for your further study. Let me give you my email address if you want to stay in touch, and then I've got to get out of here. It's just REVKOONTZ, my last name, Rev Koontz, all one thing.
What?
KOONTZ.
Okay.
Yeah, NTZ. In the South, usually the name is spelled COONCE or KOONCE. KOONTZ@gmail.com. RevKoontz@gmail.com. Okay.
If it makes you feel it,
Yeah.
several years ago,
Yeah.
we did have a class up in Charlottesville.
Yeah.
Peter Stewart came and did his Lutheran. Hated that she.
Did I get farther than Peter, though?
You probably did, but
I
too. But
guaranteed. Take it to the bank, I got farther. Yeah. All right.
So once you agree with more, maybe we.
Oh, come on. That's easy.
they both have their ends.
Oh, that's so nice. All right. Thank you, guys.